All right, welcome everybody to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your host, Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over personalities. If you're watching this, please like and share this video, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I go live or whenever I upload a new episode. But before we get into everything, I just wanted to remind you that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com. Conservative news where truth matters. As you know, I'm not the only one who is intent on bringing you a fresh perspective. I like to have other guests on who can also bring you a perspective that will educate, inform, and even delight you. But in this case, I have with me Will Hild. He is the executive director of Consumers Research, which is a very interesting organization. And he's going to be joining me to talk about a lot of this woke corporatism that's been going on. And I think it'll be a very informative discussion. So without further ado, I will bring him on. Thank you for joining me, bro.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good. So before we get into the meat and potatoes here, as I like to call it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Will Hild?
Well, my bio is on our website. I'm an attorney by training, but I've done a lot of work throughout the years in policy, and now happy to and excited to head Consumers Research, which is the nation's oldest consumer protection organization. We have a 91-year pedigree of standing up for the consumer in the marketplace, educating them on issues that are important to them, and amplifying their voice in the marketplace, which is, that area in particular, I think is probably why you're having me on today, the Consumers First Initiative.
Yes, definitely. And I did a little bit of research on your organization. I was quite taken aback when I found out you'd been around for almost 100 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Consumers Research? What does the organization do primarily?
Certainly. Well, our job is initially, I should say, when we were founded, it was actually the first widespread product testing. At one point, we had a lab in Washington, New Jersey, I think, that employed something like 500 product testers. Now, obviously, with the advent of the internet and with crowdsourcing, that's no longer necessary. There's, you can go on and get a Google review or an Amazon review of pretty much any product you'd want to buy. And so what we try to do is educate consumers on issues that are important to them, both in the marketplace and on policy. So obviously there's often things happening in Washington that are going to affect consumers. And there's often things happening between businesses and Washington that affect consumers. It's rarely just one party. It's sort of a dance between the two. And so we try to help consumers understand where their interests are at stake, and help them understand where some priorities are. And then with the Consumers First Initiative, we hope to amplify their voice. We'd gotten frustrated with the phenomenon of these companies trying to distract from their mistreatment of their customers by going woke, cozying up to woke politicians. And so we said, enough is enough. We're gonna amplify the voice of the consumer and send a simple message.
Okay, so let's get into that. Because I know you focus on various areas in which corporations may not be doing right by their customers, but wokeness is in the news nowadays. What is the harm in these companies, embracing more of a, a lot of them claim that they're trying to embrace diversity and things like that. Well, where do the main problems lie with this?
Certainly. Well, unfortunately, it's become a pretty widespread phenomenon. These companies are taking these positions on issues that are not germane to their business model and that they have no expertise in. So, for example, they're weighing in on election integrity legislation, either at the federal or the state level. And they're doing so not out of some genuine concern, but as a cynical ploy to distract from the mistreatment of their customers. It's so that they don't have to fix problems with their business models. Take American Airlines, for example. Mm-hmm. This is an airline that was just rated this year by Wall Street Journal the worst airline in America. That's the second year in a row they've gotten that infamous distinction.
Wow.
They lose the most bags. They kick the most passengers off of flights involuntarily. We actually reached out to them. We have a publication, Consumers Bulletin, and we reached out to them because we know I'd taken an American Airlines flight, and I noticed I used to fly quite frequently. I was like, I don't remember there being more legroom than this. And sure enough, they confirmed to us that during the COVID pandemic, they continued to decrease legroom on many of their flights. And this, of course, was at a time when they took a multi-billion-dollar taxpayer-funded bailout and still paid their CEO, Doug Parker, an 8-figure paycheck. So these are all issues that they would much rather not talk about. They would like to do anything to distract from that, even if it's taking positions against popular legislation like they did in the Texas legislature. It's better to have that be the front page news when your brand is talked about than it is to talk about these other issues. And just since we launched the Consumers First initiative, targeting namely American Airlines, amongst others, they've announced that they're moving to more flights with single agent boarding. So you remember when you kind of get onto the flight, there's usually two agents there, one to help you get on, and then one if you have problems, they can kind of get you rerouted or deal with that. They're in order to cut costs, they're going to move to single agent boarding, I believe, on flights with less than 80% capacity. And they also got caught, I should say, red-handed, asking some of their staff to work without pay, volunteer.
Wow.
Because they're so busy, I guess they can't afford to pay people. And of course, again, this is an airline that's taxpayer subsidized now. So that's just since we launched the initiative, it's gotten worse. So again, we see this with Nike, we see this with Coca-Cola, we saw this with Major League Baseball. We're definitely seeing it with Ticketmaster because they're guilty of multiple felonies. They would rather take positions on political issues than deal with their mistreatment of their customers. And so that's why it's so bad for customers, because it's in lieu of fixing their issues.
Well, now that is a very interesting perspective there, because because when I've written about this before, my contention is always that, oh, well, they're just trying to go woke to appeal to their client base or to their consumer base, and to pretend that they care about Black people and other minorities, because that's the thing to do right now, and they don't want to get hit by the woke mob. But from what you're saying, it sounds like it's more of a distraction from how they're actually treating their customers and the malfeasance that they're engaged in.
Exactly. You can't speak in 100% generalities. There may be some companies that hold these, at least the CEOs hold genuine feelings about this, but it's suddenly a new phenomenon in the last 4 or 5 years. This wasn't something that you saw until rather recently. And I think it's a trend, just like, lots of things in the marketplace get trendy. The trend of going woke, as they say, cozying up to woke politicians in order to distract from your misdeeds has become a major trend. It's become a go-to play. So that you get, fawning media coverage. You don't have to answer for your misdeeds. Another company we've gone after, Ticketmaster, the same year, or I should say shortly after, they have to pay a $10 million criminal fine for hacking their competitors in order to prevent consumers from seeing lower ticket prices. Suddenly, wow. They're signing on to that New York Times condescending letter about, election integrity legislation. They weren't doing this before that, right? This is a new phenomenon. And suddenly, they're out there facing the toughest antitrust enforcement action that the FTC has taken in the last 20 years. And like I said, committing literal felonies to maintain their near monopoly position in the ticketing marketplace. Again, so yeah, it's really an issue where the consumer is getting the short end of the stick. And if they say anything, they're called a racist or a bigot, or, it puts the consumer in the position of having to defend why they should care about their own interests, which is just absurd. So that's why we wanted to come out and just say, enough is enough. If you think this is going to work, if you think you're going to be able to distract, it's not going to. We you can call, us whatever you want, but we're going to keep coming and naming and shaming you for your misdeeds and your mistreatment of your customers.
Good. So you mentioned the Consumers First initiative. Well, what is that?
Absolutely. It's a 7-figure ongoing advertising campaign to name and shame these companies for their misdeeds and prevent them from being able to use this strategy, as you've noted, going woke, to distract from the mistreatment of their customers. And so we're hoping to, or I should say, we're not hoping to end the phenomenon. We are going to continue until we end the phenomenon. of seeing these companies condescend, take positions on political issues they know nothing about, that are not germane to their business, in order to distract from their misdeeds and continue to mistreat their customers. So we're just going to keep coming. We just launched on Coca-Cola a few days ago. You may have seen we launched the Always Woke-Cola campaign. They can visit.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, great. Well, I'll let you. I'll use that as a transition then.
Yeah. So I I went on YouTube and looked at this Woke-Cola video, and it was hilarious, but also sad at the same time. Like I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes here. But I mean, that video was very telling, and I learned things that I didn't even know about Coca-Cola. So why don't you talk to me about the Woke-Cola campaign? How did this come about?
Absolutely. Well, we targeted Coca-Cola in our first round of ads as well. But we wanted to take a more humorous approach, a satirical approach, but also a hard-hitting approach to really call out Coca-Cola. They're an American brand that, in some ways they're as American as baseball. And, we went after the MLB. And that's really, I think, one of the things we've heard from thousands of people. The feedback on this campaign has just been, bigger than anything we've ever seen. People feeling betrayed by these companies. These companies, rightly so, play themselves as part of America. Coca-Cola is an American company. It's an American pastime. And yet they are increasingly betraying the American consumer, talking down to them, telling them how they should discuss politics, what they should think about political issues. At the exact same time, they are increasingly doing more and more business in China, where they won't say a word about the incredible human rights abuses going on in that country. And in fact, in some ways, they are likely complicit in it. There's a congressional report that came out earlier this year that says there's substantial evidence that Coca-Cola has been sourcing sugar in China from suppliers that used forced labor. As part of the genocide against the Uyghur minority there. And so it's just an incredible, the hypocrisy is just unbelievable. They won't say anything about the CCP because they know that they would be run out of business in China if they did. But yet they will, in order to cover for that, in order to cover from all these misdeeds and the taint of forced labor in their production chain, they will come to the United States, their home, where they are a pastime and a national brand here, and they will betray the American consumer.
Okay, so can you, because this part blew me away. I didn't know about this. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the forced labor issues in China and how Coke relates to that? Because I knew that Nike and Apple and some other companies had this issue, but I didn't know that Coca-Cola did. So
certainly, it's an issue that many of these companies doing business in China are grappling with, and sadly, instead of grappling with it in the correct way, which is to figure out how to free their production chains of forced labor, they're grappling with it from a PR perspective. As you noted, I forget the exact tagline at the beginning of your show, but facts over narrative.
Truth over narrative.
Yeah, exactly. They could be focused on fixing the facts, which is the use of forced labor, or at least the taint of forced labor in their production chain. But instead, they're focusing on fixing the narrative. They simply want to distract from it. And, they go out there and they take these very self-righteous positions. And in fact, I think to some extent, it's even advantageous that they're taking positions against very popular legislation. As you saw in Texas and Georgia, these bills, when polled very high, even in many of the ethnic communities that they claim that they were somehow defending. And I think to some extent that plays to their advantage. Again, they would rather have that at the front page of the headlines, that they're quote unquote taking a stand, even though it might hurt them. Then, okay, but what are you doing about forced labor in China? What are you doing about the fact that you can't say with certainty that the people that made the sugar that went into your drink weren't forced to be there at gunpoint? So, I think it gets back to that same problem. They see things. Let's not change the facts. Let's just change the narrative.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, and you see that in other companies as well. I mean, and just in general, it's easier to just cover it up or lie about it or spin it than it is to actually push for real change. It's a very superficial approach to these issues that they claim to care about, because they claim to care about social justice. Well, I mean, slavery is a social justice issue, whether it's trafficking or happening in another country. Exactly.
And they're pulling the wool over the eyes of the American consumer. I think it goes without saying. There's the vast majority, 99.9% of American consumers, except maybe if you have a screw loose or something, you want to know that the products that you're buying were not made by people who are forced at gunpoint to make them. I think that goes without saying. I think anything else to suggest otherwise would greatly insult the American populace, who are a beacon for freedom worldwide. So again, it's in some, people have said, well, how is that? What is this related to the consumer? Well, it's still a mistreatment of the consumer, because the average person going into the shop doesn't think, well, if I buy this drink, am I buying something made with forced labor? If I go buy this shoe, you mentioned Nike, do I have to worry about whether the person making it was actually paid to be there or was forced to be there? So again, it's just another betrayal of the American consumer. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, because in general, 99.9% of Americans aren't going to say, yeah, I love supporting slavery or forced labor abroad.
Yeah.
I mean, they're right. They don't want that on their conscience. But you've also highlighted another issue with Coca-Cola in their contribution to the obesity crisis. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Well, this is a company that obviously sells a ton of products that have very high sugar content. This has been scientists have said it contributes significantly to the obesity crisis. And obviously Coca-Cola owns a ton of brands. So it's not just Coke itself. It's a ton of other options. And so, they need to be focusing on solving that. Obviously, it's a tough issue, but this is something that they've known about for decades. They have tried to avoid talking about it. And they should be working on fixing that problem. Again, fixing the facts, not just trying to fix the narrative. And again, it goes to the distraction issue. This was something that they were getting criticism about. And people were looking at this, and then, they went woke. They cozied up to woke politicians and woke activists so that they could skate free in the media and in the narrative, because that becomes the big thing to talk about when it comes to Coke. Oh, have you seen, that they took a position on this legislation? Have you seen that they told their employees to be less white? That's another, horrible thing. And it really it also makes you wonder from a consumer perspective, if something as disgusting and racist as be less white could miss the sort of quality control that they would have, you would think, for the communications that they send out to their staff. What kind of quality control does that suggest for a company that makes food products? I mean, that's a pretty scary thing, that they don't have enough quality control that somebody wouldn't look at those teaching materials and say, no, we're not going to tell people to be less of their own skin type. That's insane.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so here's a question. I mean, because Coca-Cola isn't the only one who's, embracing this type of what I call woke theology. Can you give us your thoughts? I mean, you already mentioned that they're using it as a distraction from the malfeasance that they're doing, but what are some other reasons why you think that this might be becoming such a trend?
Well, I think, again, in some ways, it's power petitioning itself. They can argue that they're like the CEO Doug Parker, for example, of American Airlines. He tried to. He couldn't even have the courage to say, "I'm taking this position on my own." He, when pushed on it, in the statement, you look at what they released. They said, we were pushed from our employees. They were demanding that we take a stand on this. So they can't even say, well, we're doing it on our own. We have to point to some unnamed. What data do they have to that? Do they have a poll that shows that their staff wanted them to do this? We're supposed to just take them on faith that they're being forced into this by some uprising within their own staff, which beggars belief, because they claim that it was their Texas staff that were making them do this. Well, the bill that they took a position on is popular in Texas. So that would suggest that they have some population within their company that's different substantially from Texas. Maybe that's correct, but they showed absolutely no evidence from that. It's just another way in which they even when they're trying to distract from their own mistakes, they can't even have the courage to say, I'm taking this position. I'm CEO Doug Parker. Right. You have to point and go, oh, we were forced to do it by our staff. We're just giving in to their demands because we're so good to labor. Well, this is a guy who laid off 19,000 people last year, okay? After being given bailouts so that they didn't have to do that, right? And then paid himself an 8-figure salary. So if he's so concerned about the views of his staff, I would imagine that some of those 19,000 people that he laid off would have liked if he'd have just skipped a year of 8-figure paychecks, taken the U.S. taxpayer money that was given to American Airlines to keep as many people employed as possible, and kept those people employed instead of going out there and playing politics. So even the stuff where they said, oh, we've heard from our staff. there's never any evidence given for that. And it's a pretty cynical ploy that suddenly, when it's to their benefit to get their name in positive press or distract from their issues, suddenly their staff are the ones pushing them to do this. I just think I think it's a lie. I think it's a cynical aspect of an overall cynical ploy.
Yeah, that excuse doesn't pass the smell test, right? I mean, because we've seen other companies, and there's other companies where employees will say, "Hey, we want to go more in this, woke direction." Just paraphrasing, or like I can't remember the name of the publisher, but they published books written by conservative politicians, and their employees had issues with it. Well, they did it anyway. So, I mean, companies can make those decisions. They don't have to bow to. And I suspect that it's always like a very small group of people, and that most employees aren't really concerned about this stuff in that way, or concerned about their company trying to go more woke. So I agree with you. I think it's a lie. And I've always thought that it's a lie when companies will make that claim. And you're right. They're not even brave enough to own it. So it just further demonstrates that none of this stuff is real. It's a ploy. It's a tactic. Now with your campaigns against this stuff, I mean, what kind of a response are you getting, like with your Consumers First initiative and some of the other things that you're
overwhelming doing? Thousands and thousands of emails have come in thanking us, saying, please keep it up. I'm so sick of feeling like I'm being condescended to and yelled at by the people who are supposed to be serving me. I mean, I'm going in and I'm, buying a coffee or getting a Coke or getting a pair of shoes or, name 100 different products. And, I'm paying them money, I'm buying their product. And yet they're trying to tell me how I should think, what I should do, that I'm a bad person if I don't think the way they do. In the case of Coca-Cola, they're telling me I'm bad because of the color of my skin. So it's just been, I thought we would get a positive feedback. I did not think it would be so overwhelming. And it's not because of Will Hild or Consumers Research. It's because there was a massive reservoir of resentment and anger against these companies because everyone can see what they're doing. We just put words to it. Everyone can see this is a cynical ploy. This is really a disgusting and craven way to treat your consumers. And it really, begs the question, especially with the China stuff, where do they see their alliances? Do they, do American brands like Nike and Coca-Cola, do they think of themselves as American companies? The CEO of Nike just got caught on an investor call saying that they are a company of China for China. So, okay, well, if that's the case, then if you're of China for China, then why are you weighing in on American political issues? Go to China and preach politics. Go talk to the CCP and tell them what you think about how they're running things. Okay, don't come here and take divisive political issues. If you're a company of China for China.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I know you have to have detractors, right? Because I'm pretty sure that the left isn't really happy about what you're doing. Well, what's some of the criticisms that you've received?
Well, I will say, I'll certainly answer your question directly, but let me say before that, the feedback that we've gotten has been across the political spectrum. We've gotten people who say, I'm on the left. I'm a lifelong Democrat voter, but I'm so tired of being used by these companies as a cynical ploy, these issues that I may agree with them on, but I know why they're doing it. And so whether you're on the left, the right, the middle, up, down, wherever you are in the political spectrum, no one likes to be treated with such disrespect that these companies have treated them. Now, as far as the feedback, there hasn't been, to what I've seen, other than the companies. Coca-Cola issued a brief statement, which was incredibly milquetoast, but also somehow also condescending and preachy. They basically said that we were, something about we respect everyone's right, but to have opinions, but they should do so respectfully, which again, nothing about how you're going to serve the American consumer. It's just more, I would say it's more preaching, but they just changed the sermon to the consumer. So yeah, there's certainly going to be pushback. And that's, we see that as our role at Consumers Research. Like I said, we're amplifying the voice of the consumer. And so that's our job, is to get out there and to push back on this stuff. I'm hopeful that these corporations, that corporate America, will learn that this is not going to work, that the next time that these conversations are being had in boardrooms and the CEO or the PR guy gets a bright idea, that they're going to, take a wild, radical left-wing position on some of this stuff, that someone will say, did you see what happened to Coke? points into the Always Coca-Cola website. Do you want that to be us? Do you want to be Ticketmaster with your numerous felonies being brought up over and over again? I say, no, thanks. We should just get back to doing the job. How about we just fix the problem rather than fixing the narrative? So the feedback so far has been overwhelmingly positive, but to the extent it's been negative, it's been mostly more of the same.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I was going to ask you like where you see this going. So it sounds like that's your objective, to get companies to say, you know what, we don't need to go to all this woke stuff because look at what could happen. I mean, there's going to be a backlash, because right now, I mean, there is a backlash, but it doesn't seem like it's a mobilized backlash, but it sounds like that's what you guys are doing right now.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. We're mobilizing. We're out there with the Consumers First Initiative. And as I've said from the very beginning, this is an ongoing advertising campaign. I think a lot of times people think you're going to throw one punch and these companies are going to learn. And unfortunately, I think they're so cynical, and for whatever reason, maybe they're just lazy. Instead of solving the problem, they want to keep going with this stuff. And so I think this is something that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be ongoing. This voice is going to have to be raised over and over and over again. And so that's why we're doing the Consumers First Initiative. That's why we're just going to keep coming.
Okay, great. Well, we're running out of time, but we got to have more of these conversations, because I think we just kind of scratched the surface here. There's more to this. But in the meantime, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. Well, people who would like to learn more can visit us at consumersresearch.org. That's consumersresearch.org. And as you noted, we also just launched a brand new campaign called Always Coca-Cola, alwayswococola.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for watching this latest episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Will Hild. I thought it was pretty enlightening, and I'm going to be having him back on to talk about some other issues, because this stuff does run deep. But before I sign off, don't forget to head on over to libertynation.com, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. You can sign up for the daily briefing or subscribe to the Member Zone, or you can just check out the latest cutting-edge conservative news and analysis with none of the spin and all of the nuance. Check out new and original material on libertynation.com. Conservative news where truth matters.